As a Polish historian of early modern period, that is 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries, I am I am very grateful that Norman Davies, one of your English-speaking historians, that is English British historian who is ethnically Anglo-Welsh, is interested in Polish history, and that's great. But well, I cannot say that I am very pleased with what he is saying and how is he writing about Polish history. So maybe it could be interesting to you. I mean, if you are an English-speaking person, either British or American or with the English language as the second language. So the problem is that Norman Davies is writing the history about Poland as if he wanted to please us, as if he wanted us to feel great about those books. And maybe there is a commercial base of this thinking, a commercial goal, but it's also possible. But I think having our hospitality, so to say, intellectual hospitality towards the people who are from different countries, especially Western countries, and who are speaking Polish and who are writing about Poland, we are so very welcoming that we would probably buy them anyway, in big numbers. But maybe the reason why he is presenting Polish history and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth of the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries so positively, in such a positive light, is maybe because he is married to a Polish woman and with from a family that has a very strong patriotic tendencies and traditions going back to the times of the Marshal Pilsudski and so on. So he's basically trying to portray our Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth of the early modern history as something inherently positive and intelligent and intelligently designed and rightly organized and so on. And it is very distant from the reality. So, for instance, there are many different smaller problems with writings of Norman Davies, and maybe I shouldn't be so criticizing him because he has quoted me once in one of his books about the lost kingdoms, and he has quoted my book about Hessen-Darmstadt, the Landgrafschaft. It would be something like a small principality or something like that. But nevertheless, there are many small problems with Norman Davies. The people from Wrocław city are very much displeased with many theories about in his book about Wrocław, which is in German, it's Breslau, and so on, and his book Microcosmos. And some people are also displeased with some of his comparisons drawn between, for instance, the Livius, the historian from ancient times, and our authors who are writing history in, for instance, 15th century, like Jan Długosz and so on, as if he didn't read either of those papers. So neither Livius's writings nor Jan Długosz's writings. But those are minor problems because, for me especially, because I'm an early modern historian, so I mean the historian of the early modern history of Europe. So, okay, so my biggest two problems with writings of Norman Davies are that he is basically portraying Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth as some sort of as a similar, when it comes to political system, to the first really liberal democracy, which is of course the United States, created in 18th century. And by the way, Norman Davies, as being partly Welsh in one half, he's half Welsh, half English. He has this tendency of being super critical about the English part of British Isles and of the English as the biggest of British nations. For instance, he has written in his book about British history, the Isles. He has highlighted all those moments when the English were super treacherous against the Welsh and the Scottish, for instance, and the Scots, for instance. He has, for instance, highlighted very much this period between the personal Scottish English union of 1603. Between that date and the date of the real union between Scotland and Britain, which was at the beginning of the 18th century in 1707. So he has highlighted, for instance, the whole adventure with the colony of Darien, which was created by the Scots, and they have established a colony among Spanish colonies, and of course, very quickly, this colony was endangered by the Spaniards, who were not wanting this situation to have the Scots so close to their colonies. So, of course, they trying to besiege this Scottish colony, and the English were not helpful. And Norman Davies, of course, is presenting the situation as if the English were not helping the Scots for spite, although they were, to some extent, they were supposed to help because they were connected by personal union of the dynasty of the Stuarts. But it didn't help, and I would suggest, for instance, that maybe they just were seeing this adventure as too costly and too far away from English colonies, and those factors are to be interpreted also. But did Norman Davies interpret them? No, he didn't even consider it. So for him, it was just on spite the bad English, good Scotsman. Okay, so when it comes to Polish Commonwealth, he's probably drawn by the similarities between the Scots and the Welsh and the different Celts in relation to the English, and the similarity to the Polish situation, when Poland is also endangered from the sides of more powerful nations, neighboring nations like Germany and Russia. So it may be very interesting to him. Probably it is, and that's why he has decided to take this road, this way to career as historian. So it's very nice, but I am a little bit worried that in many English bookshops, when on the shelves with European history, there is usually only one book about Polish history, and that's, of course, The God's Playground by Norman Davies. And the problem is that he has made two assumptions, going back to the main topic. He has made the two very worrying assumptions about Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth of the 16th century, 17th century, and 18th century, as if it was some earlier version of a liberal American presidency and presidential system, and the American democracy from 1776 and after that. So as if the Polish king was some version of President Washington or something like that. And he is very much pleased by the fact that so many people could theoretically be voting for a king. And this voting for a king seemed so nice and laudable for to Norman Davies. And I am shocked, because he must be knowing that Polish state was divided into two categories of people. the nobility and the others. And the others could not become nobility. You could only forge your ancestry papers. You could only forge your genealogy and pretend that you always that you always were a nobleman. So there was no meritocracy within this system. You couldn't be like a good servant of the state and become a nobleman as a reward. So it was not possible. So this system was totally illiberal, totally rigid, and was not really developing. So of course it may be something that like when you consider that like 7 or 8% of the whole Polish-Lithuanian population in 17th century, for instance, were and 18th century were noblemen, then you would have like considering that some people were female and some people were underage, so you would get a number of maybe 300,000 people who would actually vote for a king. When compared it to Great Britain, which had a similar population of more or less 12 million, it is only in 19th century when England and Italy were became so populous, and Germany and Italy and France only were. Germany in for instance 17th century, 18th century, in the western in the whole of Europe, only Russia, France and Germany were over 20 million of people. So in 18th century. So and in 19th century, Italy and Britain joined this small club. But still, so in 18th century, Poland and Great Britain had a similar population, but in England and in Poland, 7 or 8% of the whole population were noblemen. The similar situation to that was only in Spain, but Spain was absolute monarchy without voting. So Great Britain had, of course, parliamentary elections, and the number of people who would be could vote was like 100 from the times when I was writing the biography of Robert Walpole, the first New Style minister, prime minister of Great Britain. It was something like 175,000. And Norman Davies, of course, knows that, and he is comparing to the Polish number of the theoretical voters, that would be more or less 300,000, to this twice smaller number of British voters at the same time. Okay, so yeah, that's impressive, but he is forgetting that the Polish system was not meritocratic and the English was. In England, from the times of Cromwell, it was just normal and very progressive that people who would have the income of over 500 £500 a year. That was something. You could buy a carriage, for instance, for £70. So it was really something. So they were basically people who, in today's terms, it would be like a family that could buy twice a year a new car. So not very maybe rich, but people of who are well off. So that number of 170,000, there were the people who were not only noblemen, because British nobility it's like 5,000 people. It's similar to the Swedish situation. I will mention the Swedes in a moment. Who also had the election and the parliamentary system in 18th century for several decades. So okay, so the English number 2 times smaller than Polish number, and Norman Davies never mentioned it. It's those were not just nobility, because British nobility was like 5,000 people. they were also tradesmen and craftsmen and officers in both army and navy, people of different situation. They had only in common that they were pretty well off or rich or something like this. But it was possible that they would just vote as a one group of British people simply. So you would have the British in 18th century already had a national democracy. Whereas in Poland it was we only had more voters, more biggest proportion of voters, but that's only it. Uh, Basically, the country was a playground for the nobility and a prison for everybody else. So, and Norman Davies never mentions it, never. And this is one beef I have with him. And by the way, the Swedes, they had also parliamentary system from 1718 to 1772, when the absolute monarchy without voting was reinstated by Gustav III. But when they were conducting their parliamentary elections, it was understood that people would represent only the nobility, which was also small, the nobility, only in the whole of Europe in the 18th century, for instance, only in Spain and in Poland, there was a situation in which you had a nobility forming a visible chunk of the society. So in most countries, it was much less than 1%. So in Sweden also, the nobility was like several thousand people, like in Britain, and they could theoretically gather all in the Riddarhuset, what was the chamber for the nobility, but they were voting as a chamber. So you had also a representative of townsmen, of clergymen, and of oh my God, the free farmers. So so the chamber of the chamber for the nobility, the chamber, the adels, yeah, the Riddarhuset, then the Borgare, then the Bönder, and the Präster. That is the people of from the clergy. Okay, so and they were voting as chambers, and they were not elected. There was an not a real election, but there was at least because it was like it was supposed that if you are a mayor of a city, of big city, then you will get a seat. It was not you had an election for being the mayor, but not election to be a member of parliament, right? So, but still, it was better representation, national representation than Polish representation, who were only representing the nobility, which treated all the other people, the townsmen, the tradesmen, the craftsmen, and the farmers horribly. Some farmers were slaves, really, and like in Russia, and it's nothing laudable and nothing positive about it. So maybe you know, maybe you don't know. So, but you must realize that. So, and the role of Polish king when compared to American president like George Washington, it's even bigger absurd because George Washington was of course elected by all Americans except female and slaves, so by almost all people, males in the 13 colonies and then 13 states. And what's more, the power of and the influence of the U.S. president was the first moments on much more strong than it was ever for the Polish king in the part of our history when we had the elected monarchy, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth with the elected king. So it's another cosmic and totally wrong comparison made by Mr. Norman Davies, I'm afraid. So, and my other beef with Norman Davies is that he is taking Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth as not only an interesting project when it comes to political system, which of course it is, but he's taking it as an obvious success story, whereas in reality it was a situation that we had some sort of alliance with the Lithuanians because we were afraid of the Teutonic Order and they were afraid of the Muscovy Principality, and the Teutonic Order also for that matter. But had a slightly different collection of enemies. Only the Teutonic Order was our common enemy at the time. So we made this alliance. We never straightened the center of the power of this combined country. So it was for the first moment on a situation in which the nobility controlled all, and the power system, the power center of this combined country, was never strengthened. So it was going to fail, and obviously from the first moment on, because when you could not support the king and the executive, then you would have a union which is powerful at the beginning, and it was exactly a case, and weaker and weaker in comparison to all the neighboring countries which were doing precisely the strengthening of the executive, of the absolute monarchs and so on, when they already finished with their times of lunacy, of religious wars, and which we did not have in the times of the beginnings of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. When they got rid of those absurd conflicts within France and Brandenburg and Austria and Russia and so on, then we started to have them. So we started to be intolerant. We started to be intolerant Catholics. So and then it was clear that we are not only less sympathetic, but we are also weaker and weaker in comparison when they already coped with the situation, and they started strengthening the political system, and we were not doing it. We stayed in the 15th century till the end of First Polish Republic, till the first partition, till the last partition of Poland in 1795. So 1795. So we never evolved. There is nothing laudable about Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth in terms of strength and in terms of meritocracy and in terms of liberalism. It was a system that was doomed to fail. It survived for more years only because the neighboring countries had religious wars and different problems at the same time. But when they got rid of those problems, the situation became obvious that we are weaker and so on. For instance, those historians who are fascinated at the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth never asked themselves a very simple question: how it was possible that the Swedish Empire, who had only like 3 million inhabitants, was a more than equal opponent of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, which was like, and is still like, 4 times more populous. How it's possible? And what's more, Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was for the most part of the till the years like 1730s, Poland was much richer than Sweden was. So Yeah. So Poland was 4 times more. Poland, Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was 4 times more populous and also a bit richer. And still, the Swedes were beating us time and time again, and we drew them back from the territory of the Commonwealth only because we simply bribed the Brandenburg, and we also got some money for the new army from Austria. So not even using our own strength. So this is Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, the real one, not as depicted in the fictitious works by Norman Davies, I'm afraid. So I am glad that there is the English historian who is writing about us in English, but he very often writes nonsense about us. So that's the problem.